My mother-in-law told me she would make sure CPS got involved if anything ever happened to my unborn child. And the worst part is, she said it like she was doing me a favor. I didn't react at first. I just looked at her, trying to understand if I had heard her correctly, because people don't usually say things like that out loud. Not like it's casual conversation. But she didn't take it back. She just smiled slightly, like she had already decided how everything was going to go. My wife was already exhausted that day. She's been struggling a lot with the pregnancy, and I think that's part of why her mother has been so involved lately. At least that's what it looked like at first. Help, support, someone stepping in. But I've known her long enough now to understand that her version of help always comes with strings attached. When we first started dating, my wife told me things that made me uncomfortable, even back then. She used to talk about how her mother would go through her phone when she was in school. Not just occasionally, regularly, like it was normal. She would read messages, go through her journal, even comment on things she wrote privately to herself. At the time, I thought it was just an overbearing parent situation, something she grew up with, something that would fade when she became an adult. It didn't fade. It evolved. Now she lives very close to us. Too close, if I'm being honest. And at first, my wife defended her. She said she just wanted to help, that she was excited to be a grandmother. That word, grandmother, it didn't even feel like the right word when she said it. Because she never really says it like that. She says things like, my baby, instead. The first time I heard it, I thought I misheard. It was during dinner. She was talking about the crib she bought, and she looked at my wife and said it very naturally, like it was obvious. My baby is going to love this. My wife corrected her immediately. She said, no, it's not your baby, it's our baby. And for a second, everything went quiet. Then my mother-in-law laughed. Not an awkward laugh, a confident one, like she was humoring her. Of course, she said, our baby. But even then, something about the way she said it didn't feel like she meant it. It felt like she was correcting my wife, not agreeing with her. After that, small things started happening. She would show up more often when I wasn't home. She would bring gifts every time, crib pieces, baby clothes, small things that seemed harmless on their own, but there was always this pattern. Every visit, every gift, every conversation, it would slowly circle back to the same idea. Ownership. Not support, not family. Something closer to possession. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, because what kind of person thinks like that about their own grandchild? But then I learned where she works. She works at the hospital, the same hospital my wife will most likely give birth in. And not just any position, she has access. Administrative access, medical access, the kind of access that lets you see things you probably shouldn't be looking at unless you absolutely need to. My wife told me once, almost casually, that her mother had mentioned details about a doctor's appointment before she even told her about it. That was the first time I felt something shift in my stomach, but I still didn't say anything because I didn't want to be the guy who turns concern into paranoia. That changed the day she started referring to the baby as if it already belonged to her. It wasn't even a confrontation at first. It was just a comment while she was sitting in our living room, looking at the ultrasound pictures. She smiled and said, he's going to be such a good baby, my baby. My wife corrected her again, a little sharper this time. But instead of stepping back, she leaned forward slightly and said something that I still can't stop thinking about. I bought most of the things he needs. That kind of makes him mine, doesn't it? My wife didn't answer, and I remember watching her face in that moment. Not anger, not shock, something more like confusion. Like she was trying to understand if that was a joke or not. I wish it had been a joke, but it wasn't, because things escalated after that. She started offering to come with my wife to every appointment. Not asking, offering, in a way that made refusal feel uncomfortable, like saying no would be rude. And every time I wasn't home, she stayed longer. Sometimes I would come back from work and notice the energy in the apartment had changed. Not in an obvious way, just subtle things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room, smiles that disappeared too quickly. And then came the hospital visits. My wife had a complication recently. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that she had to go in while I was at work. And of course, her mother took her. I found out later that she was there the entire time, in the room, talking to doctors, asking questions, answering things on my wife's behalf. My wife told me she felt like she was being watched more than supported. That was the first time she said it out loud. Watched. Not helped. Watched. And then came the moment that changed everything. She was sitting in our kitchen, drinking tea like nothing was wrong, and she looked at my wife and said something very calm, almost soft. You know, sometimes babies end up in situations where they need someone more stable. I asked her what she meant. She smiled at me and didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I just mean CPS exists for a reason. That's all. And I remember the silence after that. Not loud silence, heavy silence. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't move. My wife looked at her and told her to leave. For the first time ever, she didn't argue. She just stood up, took her bag, and before walking out, she said one last thing, very quietly, almost kindly. "I hope you don't make mistakes you can't fix later." And then she left. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that my wife didn't sleep that night, and I didn't either. Because once someone says something like that out loud, you can't unhear it. And now I keep thinking about something she said earlier, about knowing how systems work, about hospitals, about access, and about what she might already be planning without telling anyone. And I'm starting to realize something I don't want to believe. This might not be about being overprotective at all. This might be about preparation. And I don't know what scares me more, what she has already done or what she hasn't done yet. After that night, I started paying attention to everything she did in a completely different way. It's strange how quickly your perception changes once a single comment shifts your internal baseline. Before that CPS remark, I thought I was dealing with an overbearing mother-in-law. After it, I started wondering if I was dealing with someone who already had a plan. And the more I replayed her words, the more uncomfortable I felt about how easily she said them. Not as a threat, not even as manipulation, but as something already integrated into her thinking. Like CPS wasn't a dramatic escalation to her. It was just a tool, a system she already understood. My wife noticed I had gone quiet the next few days. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her I was just tired. That wasn't entirely a lie, but it also wasn't the truth. The truth was that I had started noticing patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. For example, the way she asked questions about medical appointments. Not directly asking for details, but always positioning herself so information came out naturally.
What did the doctor say about the baby's development? Are they still monitoring everything closely? Did they mention anything about delivery plans yet?
Small questions, but always aimed in the same direction. Information gathering. And what made it worse was that my wife would answer them without hesitation. Not because she didn't have boundaries, but because she had grown up in an environment where sharing information with her mother was normal, even when it shouldn't be. Especially when it shouldn't be. I started noticing something else too. She wasn't just asking questions. She was remembering things my wife hadn't told her directly. Appointment timing, doctor names, small medical details that should have stayed private, unless someone actively shared them. One evening, after she left, I asked my wife something I had been avoiding. How does she know all this? My wife looked at me like she didn't fully understand the question. Then she said something that made my stomach drop slightly. She works at the hospital. It wasn't new information, but hearing it again in that context felt different because it wasn't just about employment anymore. It was about proximity, access, structure. We didn't talk much after that. But that night, I started thinking about something I hadn't considered before. How much influence someone can have over systems just by being inside them, and how easily that influence can be invisible from the outside. The next major shift happened about a week later. My wife had a minor complication and had to go to the hospital during the day while I was at work. Nothing emergency level, but serious enough that she needed monitoring. Her mother offered to take her, and my wife accepted. That was the first time I wasn't there. I didn't think much of it at the time until my wife came home. She looked different, not physically, emotionally, like she'd experienced something she didn't fully know how to describe. I asked her how it went. She said it was fine, but then she paused and added, "She stayed the whole time." At first I thought she meant she stayed in the waiting room, but that's not what she meant. She meant she stayed involved, present during conversations, asking questions, speaking to staff, answering things on my wife's behalf. When she hesitated, I felt something tighten in my chest when she said that, because I knew exactly what that meant. I asked her how it went. She said it was fine, but then she paused and added, "She stayed the whole time." At first I thought she meant she stayed in the waiting room, but that's not what she meant. She meant she stayed involved, present during conversations, asking questions, speaking to staff, answering things on my wife's behalf. When she hesitated, I felt something tighten in my chest when she said that, because I knew exactly what that meant. And I started thinking about what happens after birth. Because if this is what she does before the child is here, what happens when the child actually exists? That question stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. But the real turning point came a few days later. She came over again in the evening, unannounced. I was home this time. She was in a good mood, almost cheerful. She brought more baby items, another small gift bag. But this time, she stayed longer than usual. And at some point, while my wife was in the kitchen, she leaned slightly closer to me and said something that didn't fit the tone at all. You know, hospitals can be complicated places. After that conversation, I started noticing something I couldn't unsee anymore. Every time she spoke about the baby, it wasn't just excitement. It was certainty. Like the outcome had already been decided somewhere else, and we were just catching up to it. And that feeling, it started to spread into everything she did. Not in obvious ways, in small adjustments.
The way she positioned herself in conversations. The way she asked questions that didn't feel like questions anymore, but like confirmation checks.
And the more I paid attention, the more I realized something uncomfortable. She wasn't reacting to the pregnancy, she was managing it. My wife didn't see it the same way at first. Or maybe she did, but she didn't want to give it weight. Because once you give something weight, you have to respond to it. And conflict is something she's been avoiding her entire life with her mother. That pattern became even clearer a few days later. We had another appointment scheduled, routine check. But my wife's mother insisted again on going with her. And again, my wife said yes.
I remember asking if she wanted me to rearrange work.
She said it wasn't necessary. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Because it wasn't about necessity. It was about default. Her mother had become the default person for anything related to the baby. And I was starting to realize I was becoming secondary in a system I didn't agree to. When my wife came back that day, she didn't speak immediately. She sat down in silence. Not stressed, not emotional, just distant. Like part of her attention had stayed somewhere else. I asked her what happened. At first, she said nothing. Then she corrected herself and said she was in the room again. That was the first real shift in tone. Not she came with me. Not she helped. In the room. I asked her what she meant by that, and she explained that her mother wasn't just waiting anymore. She was actively present during discussions, talking to staff, asking questions, and at one point, answering for her when she hesitated. I felt something tighten in my chest when I heard that. Because that crosses a line that isn't emotional anymore. That's procedural involvement. That's substitution. My wife saw my reaction and immediately tried to soften it. She said she didn't think it was intentional, that her mother was just helping. But the way she said it didn't sound convinced. It sounded like repetition, like a phrase she had used too many times to question it properly anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept replaying everything in my head. The CPS comment, the my baby language, the hospital presence, the way she kept referencing systems. And something started forming in my mind that I didn't like. A pattern where every step made sense only if the previous step had already been accepted, which meant resistance wasn't resetting anything. It was just slowing it down. The next day, she came over again, earlier than usual. No warning. I was home this time. She walked in like she always did. Comfortable, familiar, and she brought more items. Small baby clothes, a blanket. She placed them on the couch without asking, like she was updating something already in progress. Then she sat down and started talking. Not about feelings, not about excitement, about logistics, about timing, about when the baby arrives. Not if, when. That distinction started bothering me more than anything else, because it removes uncertainty completely. My wife tried to stay calm during the conversation, but I could see she was getting quieter, more passive. And then, mid-sentence, her mother said something that shifted the entire tone of the room. I just want everything to go smoothly. I don't want any confusion when decisions need to be made. My wife asked what she meant by decisions. There was a pause, a long one. Not awkward, intentional. Then she said, well, in situations like this, there are always moments where people might not be in the best position to decide everything alone. I felt my focus sharpen instantly, because that wasn't vague anymore. That was directional language. My wife asked her directly what she meant. Instead of answering, she smiled slightly and said, I've seen how these systems work. That's all. Systems. Again. And this time, I didn't stay silent. I asked her what systems she was talking about. She looked at me for a moment. Not surprised, not defensive, just evaluating. Then she said very calmly, I just mean that when professionals get involved, things tend to move in ways people don't expect. My wife went still. And then she told her mother to stop talking like that. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, for the first time. Her mother stood up slowly, looked at both of us, and said, I hope you don't misunderstand me. I'm trying to make sure nothing goes wrong. Pause. But sometimes, preventing problems requires action before people realize there is one. She left after that, and the moment the door closed, the entire room felt heavier. My wife finally said it out loud. She talks like she already has authority over this. And I realized she wasn't wrong.
2. I still remember the exact moment. I realized my stepdad didn't just dislike us. He enjoyed humiliating us. Not loudly, not in a way outsiders would ever notice, but in small, controlled moments where he could push just enough to make us uncomfortable and then act like nothing happened. At first, I told myself it was just his personality, the kind of man who always has something to say, always correcting, always observing, always judging. But over time, I started noticing something more specific. He never behaved like that in front of other people. When guests were around, he was completely different. Polite, almost charming, even relaxed. But the moment the door closed and it was just us, something in him shifted. It was like a switch, and suddenly everything we did became something he could comment on. My sister noticed it before I did. She's older than me, and she learned early how to survive him. Dinner night, maybe a year before things got worse, I accidentally dropped a fork. It wasn't loud, just metal hitting plate, but he stopped mid-sentence, looked directly at me, and said nothing for a few seconds. That silence felt longer than the sound itself. Then he said, "You need to be more careful." Not angry, not raised voice, just disappointed, like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. She became quiet in a very specific way. Not peaceful quiet, controlled quiet. She would move through the house like she was trying not to trigger anything. Eat quickly, speak only when necessary, avoid eye contact when possible. I tried to copy her, but I wasn't as good at it. Because I still believed for a long time that if I behaved correctly enough, he would eventually stop. A belief didn't survive long. There was one memory that stuck with me early on. My sister didn't even look up. That was the first time I understood she had already adapted to him. Completely. The day everything escalated started like any normal day. My sister was in the kitchen making food, potato souffle with ketchup. It sounds simple, almost irrelevant, but for her, it's important. She has always struggled with certain textures, and that meal is one of the few things she can actually eat without discomfort. It was never an issue. Until him. He walked into the kitchen without announcing himself, stopped the moment he saw her plate, and stared at it. Not confused, not curious, disgusted, like she'd violated something unspoken. Then he finally spoke. "Are you seriously eating that?" Not loud, not aggressive, just sharp enough to cut the air. My sister didn't respond. She kept eating. That was her strategy. No reaction, no fuel. Let it pass. But this time, it didn't pass. He stepped closer to the table, looked at the plate again, and shook his head slightly. "You really think that's normal?" Still no answer, but I could see her hand tighten slightly around the fork. Control, holding it in. Then he added, "Your generation really has no standards anymore." That's when I started feeling something shift in my stomach, because it wasn't about food anymore. It was about superiority. He wasn't correcting her. He was placing himself above her. Then something changed. He pulled out his phone. At first I thought he was just checking something, but then he raised it, pointed it directly at her plate, and took a picture, just like that. No warning, no hesitation. My sister stopped chewing, slowly put her fork down, and looked at him. "What are you doing?" He didn't even look up. "I'm showing your mother what kind of food is being eaten in this house." That sentence changed the structure of the moment, because now it wasn't personal opinion anymore. It was documentation, evidence, like he was building a case. My sister leaned back slightly, and I saw something I hadn't seen often. Not anger, not shock, something deeper. Exhaustion. Like she had reached a limit she didn't even know existed. She said quietly, "Okay, then I'll take a picture of your receding hairline." Silence. Immediate. He froze, turned toward her, studied her, and smiled. Small, controlled, almost amused. "Oh, so now you talk back." That's when I realized this wasn't about food. It was about control, and whether she was still inside it. He left the kitchen, quietly, but the silence he left behind felt heavier. My sister finally said, "He's getting worse." Not emotional, not dramatic, just fact. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I started noticing something strange after that night. The house didn't feel louder. It felt structured, like everyone had slowly adjusted their behavior around something unspoken. No one said it out loud, but we were all adapting. My sister stopped reacting completely. My mother started over-explaining everything. And I started listening more than speaking. But the most unsettling part was him. He became calmer. Not less present, just more precise. Studied her, then smiled. Small. Controlled. Almost amused. "Oh, so now you talk back." That's when I realized this wasn't about food. It was about control. And whether she was still inside it. He left the kitchen. Like he had established something internally and was now maintaining it. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like stabilization. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, and I heard voices from the kitchen before I even entered. My mother and him. Low tone, controlled. But this time, it wasn't about tension. It was about alignment. "I just don't want misunderstandings," my mother said. And he replied, "There won't be if everyone understands expectations." Studied her, then smiled. Small, controlled, almost amused. "Oh, so now you talk back." That's when I realized this wasn't about food. It was about control and whether she was still inside it. He left the kitchen, quietly, but the silence he left behind felt heavier. My sister finally said, "He's getting worse." Not emotional, not dramatic, just fact. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. That word again, expectations. Not feelings, not communication, expectations. When I entered the room, both of them stopped briefly. Not because they were hiding something, but because I wasn't part of that specific conversation layer. My sister was already there, silent, watching. My stepdad looked at all three of us and said calmly, "We should all be on the same page." My sister immediately responded, "We are not on the same page." No hesitation, no softness. The room tightened instantly. My mother tried to interrupt. "Let's not turn this into something bigger." But my sister didn't stop. "You don't get to decide what is normal here." Silence. And then he smiled slightly, that same smile again, and said, "I'm not deciding anything. I'm just observing behavior." That sentence changed the atmosphere because it removed responsibility again. My mother looked uncertain, like she was starting to lose track of what was fair versus what was being reframed. Then my sister said something she had never said before. "Stop treating us like we're problems you need to manage." That hit harder than anything before, because it wasn't about food or tone or comments. It was about existence. For the first time, there was no surface topic left, just intent. My stepdad didn't respond immediately. He looked at her for a long time, then said, "I think you misunderstand correction." That word again, correction. Not criticism, not behavior, correction. That's when something inside me shifted, because I realized this wasn't just conflict anymore. It was ideology. My mother finally spoke louder. "Enough, both of you." But her voice wasn't stable. It was breaking slightly, because she was trying to hold something together that was already splitting. My sister stood up, slowly, and said, "I'm not staying in a house where I feel monitored all the time." That was the first real rupture statement. Not emotional, not reactive, decisive. My stepdad leaned back slightly and said calmly, "No one is monitoring anyone." And for the first time, I saw my sister laugh. Not humor, not disbelief, just exhaustion. "You literally comment on everything we do." He shook his head. "I comment when something is incorrect." That word again, incorrect. Not wrong, not different, incorrect. That's when my mother finally turned to him and said, "Why does it always have to be corrected?" Silence, a real one this time. And then he said, "Because without correction, things drift." That sentence landed differently because it wasn't emotional. It was structural logic. In his mind, everything was being stabilized, and anything resisting that was deviation. My sister looked at him directly and said, "We are not things you stabilize." That was the moment the entire room stopped. No one spoke. Even he didn't respond immediately. Then he said, quieter, "I think you're interpreting intent incorrectly." My mother finally snapped slightly. "Stop saying that." And that was the first time her voice broke through his structure. Not fully, but enough. Then something unexpected happened. My mother turned to us and said, "I need everyone to step back." Not him. Everyone. That was the moment I realized she was still trying to avoid choosing sides, but the system didn't allow neutrality anymore. My sister grabbed her jacket. "I'm done here." She walked toward the door. My mother called her name, but didn't follow. I hesitated, looked at him. He didn't stop her. He just watched. Calm. Like he had already accounted for this outcome. Before she left, my sister looked back. I stayed standing, watching him. He finished his coffee. She'll come back when she calms down. Not a guess, a pattern. And that's when I realized something terrifying. He didn't think he had lost control, because in his system, nothing had failed. Everything had only reacted. That night, I left the house too. Not in anger, not in protest, just clarity. Because because I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a man who escalated emotionally. This was a man who reorganized environments. And if you stayed inside that system long enough, you stopped noticing you were being adjusted. You just started calling it normal. My mother finally snapped slightly. "Stop saying that!" And that was the first time her voice broke through his structure. Not fully, but enough. Then, something unexpected happened. My mother turned to us and said, "I need everyone to step back." Not him. Everyone. That was the moment I realized she was still trying to avoid choosing sides. But the system didn't allow neutrality anymore. My sister grabbed her jacket. "I'm done here." She walked toward the door. My mother called her name, but didn't follow. I hesitated, looked at him. He didn't stop her. He just watched, calm, like he had already accounted for this outcome. Before she left, my sister turned back once and said, "You don't correct people you respect." And then she left. The door closed. No one filled the silence. My mother sat down, exhausted. I stayed standing, watching him. He finished his coffee. "She'll come back when she calms down." Not a guess, a pattern. And that's when I realized something terrifying. He didn't think he had lost control of anything, because in his system, nothing had failed. Everything had only reacted. That night, I left the house too. Not in anger, not in protest, just clarity. Because I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a man who escalated emotionally. This was a man who reorganized environments. And if you stayed inside that system long enough, you stopped noticing you were being adjusted. You just started calling it normal. Every movement, every reaction, every silence, all of it had been shaped. Not by accident, not by conflict, by structure, by correction, by the quiet expectation that everyone would eventually align. And the terrifying part was how easy it was to slip into that alignment without realizing it. Because he didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he didn't explode. He calibrated, he observed, he commented, he adjusted, and slowly everyone else adjusted too, until the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a system he maintained, a system he believed was functioning. And when my sister walked out, he didn't see it as a rupture. He saw it as deviation. Temporary, predictable, correctable. "She'll come back when she calms down." That sentence stayed with me because it wasn't hope, it wasn't reassurance, it was certainty, pattern-based certainty. And that's when I finally understood. He didn't think he had lost anything. Not control, not authority, not influence. Because in his mind, the system was still intact. Only the variables were shifting. And that night, when I walked out too, I realized something even worse. Leaving wasn't rebellion. Leaving was the first moment I stepped outside his structure long enough to see it for what it really was. Not a family, a framework. And we had all been living inside it without noticing.
3.
When I saw the number 0 on my son's inhaler, I genuinely thought I had killed him. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. I mean, I truly believed my own stupidity was about to kill my 7-year-old son in the middle of Hong Kong while my wife stood right next to me. And the worst part is, she still has no idea it was my fault. My son has asthma. Not mild asthma, the kind where inhalers are checked constantly because forgetting one can become an emergency very quickly. It had already happened before when he was younger. Nothing life-threatening back then, but enough to scare us. Enough that my wife became obsessive about checking his medication before trips. Normally, she handled everything medical. Not because I didn't care, but because she was more organized than me, more detail-oriented. She noticed expiration dates, prescription renewals, backup medication. I handled the practical stuff. Bags, travel plans, tickets, normal dad logistics. A few days before our trip, my son's inhaler hit 0. My wife noticed immediately. She bought a replacement that same day and left it on the kitchen counter. I remember the exact image. Bright kitchen light, white box, new inhaler still sealed inside. She pointed directly at it and said, "Please pack the new one into his backpack." Not vague, not implied, direct instruction. And I remember answering, "Yeah, I got it." That memory honestly makes me sick now, because I did hear her. I just didn't process the importance of what I was doing. I was distracted, thinking about airport timing, suitcases, passports, currency exchange, all the stupid little travel details that suddenly feel meaningless once real danger appears. At some point, I walked into the kitchen, saw an inhaler on the counter, grabbed it without checking, and shoved it into the backpack. Done. That's all it took. 1 second. One careless assumption. and I changed the entire trajectory of that trip. The first few days in Hong Kong were actually amazing. That's another reason this memory feels cursed to me. Everything before the attack felt normal, happy. We took photos constantly. My son loved the crowded streets and bright signs everywhere. He kept trying snacks from random street vendors while my wife worried he'd get sick. He was energetic the entire trip, running ahead, pointing at things, asking questions every 5 seconds. Completely normal. And because everything felt normal, I never checked the inhaler again. Not once. On the third day, we took a ferry to one of the islands. I remember the weather immediately feeling different there. Heavy, humid, the kind of air that feels thick when you breathe. Even I noticed it. My wife mentioned it too. She joked that her hair was losing the fight against the humidity. My son seemed fine at first. A little tired maybe, but nothing alarming. We walked through a crowded area near the port. Tourists everywhere. Street noise, ferries moving in and out. And then I noticed something small. My son slowed down. Not dramatically. Just enough for my brain to register it. At first, I thought he was hot. Then I heard him cough. One short cough, then another. My wife turned immediately. "Are you okay?" He nodded, but he didn't answer properly. That was the first moment my stomach tightened. Because parents learn certain signals, and one of the worst is when your child stops responding normally. We stopped walking. He put one hand against his chest, trying to breathe deeper. My wife crouched beside him instantly. "Do you need your inhaler?" He nodded again, this time faster. That was the moment everything still felt manageable. Routine. We had done this before. Grab inhaler, 2 puffs, wait a minute, problem solved. My wife opened the backpack calmly, still controlled, still operating like this was standard procedure. Then she froze slightly, just for half a second, and looked at me. "Where is it?" I immediately reached into the bag, not panicking yet, because in my head there was still no possibility it wasn't there. I moved clothes aside, chargers, snacks, passport pouch. Then I found it. I still remember how normal it looked in my hand. Blue plastic, slight scratches on the side, completely ordinary. And then I looked at the counter on top. For a second, my brain genuinely refused to process it. I stared at that tiny number while my son wheezed beside me. And suddenly I knew. Not suspected, knew. I packed the old inhaler, the empty one. I'd left the new one sitting at home on the kitchen counter. My wife looked at me immediately. "Why isn't it working?" That question still destroys me. Because in that moment, I had a choice. Tell her instantly, or hide it. And I hid it. Not with some elaborate lie. I just didn't say the truth. I handed it over and muttered something about maybe there still being enough left for a few puffs. Even saying it felt pathetic. But panic changes your brain. You stop thinking morally, you start thinking about survival. My son inhaled again. Nothing. Another puff. Still wheezing. And that's when the fear changed shape. Before that moment, this was an inconvenience. Now it became danger. Real danger. I started noticing people around us looking over. My wife was trying to keep him calm while checking the inhaler repeatedly like the number might somehow change. I remember hearing her say, "It says 0." And I swear my entire body went cold. Because now it wasn't just my realization anymore. It was becoming reality. My son started coughing harder. His breathing became uneven. Short, sharp, like every breath was work. My wife stood up immediately and started looking around for help, asking strangers if there was a pharmacy nearby. Most people didn't understand English well enough. Others pointed vaguely down the street. Everything suddenly felt too slow, too crowded, too far away. And all I could think was, this is happening because of me. Not fate, not bad luck. Me. One stupid mistake, one moment of carelessness, and now my child couldn't breathe in a foreign country. We started moving back toward the ferry area because someone told us there might be medical staff there. My wife held my son while we walked quickly through the crowd. I carried the backpack, that stupid backpack, and every time I looked at it, I felt sick. My son kept trying to breathe normally. That was honestly the worst part. He was trying so hard not to panic. Kids can sense fear in adults immediately, and I think he knew we were scared. At one point, he looked at me and asked, "Why isn't it working?" I still hear that question in my head sometimes when I can't sleep. Because he trusted me completely, and I had failed him. My wife finally snapped at me while we were walking. "Do you have another inhaler anywhere?" I said no too quickly, almost automatically. By the time we reached the clinic, my shirt was soaked through with sweat. Not from the heat, from adrenaline. That horrible kind where your body feels cold and hot at the same time. My son could still walk, but barely. Every breath sounded wrong, too sharp, too forced, like his body was fighting for air manually. The clinic was tiny. That's the first thing I remember. For some reason, I had imagined a hospital. Bright lights, emergency staff, order. Instead, it looked more like a cramped office, with a waiting area and old chairs pushed against the walls. There were already people inside, and when my wife rushed through the door holding our son, everyone turned to look at us immediately. That's when panic stopped feeling private. A woman behind the desk stood up quickly when she heard him wheezing. She started speaking rapidly in Cantonese to someone in the back. A doctor appeared almost immediately. Thank God he spoke English. Not perfectly, but enough. He crouched in front of my son and started asking questions. Asthma history, medication, triggers. Then he asked the simplest question possible. Where is his inhaler? And I swear to God, I almost threw up right there. My wife handed him the empty inhaler before I could react. The doctor looked at the counter, then at us, then back at the inhaler. And I saw the exact second his expression changed. Not judgment, recognition. He understood immediately what had happened. This is empty. My wife answered before I could speak. We didn't know. We. That word hit me like a punch. Because, no. She didn't know. I did. The doctor didn't waste time asking more questions. He took my son into another room immediately while a nurse brought equipment over. My wife followed them. I stayed behind for a second. Completely frozen. And I remember looking down at the inhaler still sitting in my hand. That tiny, stupid object suddenly felt radioactive. One careless mistake. That's all this was. Not evil, not intentional, just carelessness. But standing there in that clinic, I realized something terrifying. Intentions don't matter much once damage starts happening. I finally walked into the treatment room a few seconds later. My son was sitting upright while they gave him oxygen. The sound alone almost broke me. That mechanical airflow, the wheezing underneath it. My wife was beside him, rubbing his back slowly while trying to stay calm. And then she looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, how did this happen? I still remember how fast my brain started working in that moment. Too fast, like survival instinct took over before morality could catch up. I told her maybe the inhaler still had a few doses left before we left home. Maybe the counter wasn't accurate. Even now, years later, I hate myself for how naturally the lie came out. Because part of me already knew the truth would destroy her. Not just because of the mistake itself, but because she trusted me with one simple thing. One simple thing. And I failed. The doctor gave my son another treatment while monitoring his breathing. Slowly, thankfully, it started helping. Not immediately, but enough. Enough that the panic in the room lowered slightly. Enough that my wife stopped looking like she was about to collapse. And that should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it somehow made me feel worse, because now I had time to think, really think, about what almost happened, about how close we actually came. And once your brain starts calculating almost, it becomes impossible to stop. Almost no clinic nearby, almost worse air quality, almost collapsing on the ferry, almost no treatment in time, almost dead. That word stayed in my head over and over. Almost. The doctor eventually told us he wanted us to go to a larger hospital once we returned to the mainland. He said my son was stabilizing, but the environment on the island probably triggered the attack badly. My wife nodded immediately. I barely heard anything after that, because the guilt had become physical by then. Heavy, like something pressing down inside my chest. The ferry ride back felt endless. My son was exhausted and quiet. My wife stayed beside him the entire time, holding him close, watching his breathing constantly. And I sat across from them pretending to look normal while my brain replayed the kitchen counter over and over again. The new inhaler was sitting there the entire time. Brand new, safe, ready. And I left it behind because I couldn't be bothered to double check what I grabbed. At one point during the ferry ride, my wife finally relaxed slightly. Not fully, but enough to breathe normally again. And then she said something that honestly hurt more than if she screamed at me. She said, "Thank God we packed the inhaler." I actually felt my stomach twist when she said that, because she still believed it saved him. She thought the old inhaler worked enough to stabilize him temporarily. She had no idea it was empty before we even left the hotel that morning. And I didn't correct her. I should have. I know I should have. But once a lie starts protecting you from consequences, confessing suddenly feels impossible, especially when everyone is finally calming down. Especially after watching your child struggle to breathe for an hour. You start convincing yourself the truth would only make things worse. That's how people justify things. Not dramatically, quietly, step by step. By the time we reached the hospital on the mainland, my son looked much better. Still tired, still shaky, but breathing properly again. The doctors there examined him quickly and gave us another inhaler immediately. I remember staring at the new counter on top. Full. Safe. That number honestly made me feel sick, because it reminded me of the 0. And once you've seen that number during a real emergency, you never look at inhalers the same way again. The hospital staff asked us routine questions. Travel history, previous asthma attacks, medication usage, and every single answer felt dangerous to me, because hidden underneath all of it was the real story. The father packed the wrong inhaler. The father caused the entire situation. The father almost got his kid killed. But nobody knew. Not even my wife. And somehow that secret became harder to confess with every passing hour. That night, back at the hotel, my son finally fell asleep normally again. I remember standing beside his bed, watching him breathe. Just watching. Counting breaths without realizing I was doing it. My wife came over quietly and hugged me from behind, and then she said something that genuinely destroyed me. "You stayed really calm today." I almost laughed when she said it. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Calm? Inside my head, I had been collapsing for hours. But apparently panic and guilt can look identical to composure from the outside. I asked her if she blamed me for anything. She looked confused immediately and said, "Why would I blame you?" I couldn't even answer, because the truth was sitting right there between us. Invisible. After she went to shower, I opened the backpack again. I don't even know why. Maybe punishment, maybe disbelief. But I took the inhaler out and stared at it for a long time. 0. Still 0. That tiny number felt evil now. I kept imagining alternate versions of the day, different timelines. One where he collapsed before the clinic. One where the ferry was delayed. One where there wasn't medical help nearby. One where my wife found out immediately what I had done. And honestly, sometimes I think the last one scared me almost as much as the others. Not because she would yell at me, but because I knew she would never trust me the same way again. That's the part people don't talk about with guilt. It's not just fear of consequences. It's fear of becoming a different person in someone else's eyes. For the rest of the trip, I became obsessive, checking inhalers constantly, checking pockets, checking bags, checking counters over and over. My wife even joked about it at one point. She said, "Okay, I think we officially learned our lesson about asthma prep." Our lesson. Again, that word. Our. And every single time she said it, I felt worse. Because it wasn't our mistake. It was mine. Only mine. Years have passed since that trip. My son is older now, healthy, doing well. My wife still tells that story sometimes when people talk about stressful vacations. But the version she tells isn't real. In her version, the inhaler was almost empty. In her version, the medication still barely worked long enough to help him stabilize. In her version, we got unlucky. And every time I hear her tell it, I realize I've waited too long to ever tell the truth now. Because this secret stopped being about the inhaler years ago. Now it's about trust. And I honestly don't know which would hurt her more. The mistake itself, or the fact that I let her comfort me afterward while knowing I caused the entire thing.
I thought the guilt would fade with time. That's the lie people tell themselves after surviving something. If everybody's okay, eventually your brain lets it go. That is complete bullshit. Because years later, I still check inhaler counters every single time I see one. Doesn't matter where. Pharmacy, airport, TV commercial. Doesn't matter if it's not even my son's. My eyes go straight to the number automatically. And every single time, for a split second, I'm back in Hong Kong, standing in that heat while my kid struggles to breathe because of me. The weirdest part is that nobody around me knows this memory defines me now. Not really. To everyone else, it was just a scary travel story. To me, it became proof of something I never wanted to learn about myself. That one moment of carelessness is enough to permanently damage someone else's life. Especially when that someone is your child. My son is older now, old enough to barely remember the trip properly. Sometimes he brings it up jokingly. He calls it the island asthma disaster. He laughs about it. My wife laughs too. And every time they do, I feel this horrible split in my brain. Relief on one side, self-hatred on the other. Because they're laughing at the edited version of the story, not the real one. The real version is uglier. The real version is that his father failed the easiest responsibility imaginable. Pack the correct inhaler. That was it. That was the task. Not save someone from a burning building, not perform surgery, just grab the right inhaler. And I still got it wrong. Here's another part of this I've never admitted to anyone either. For months after the trip, I started quietly checking my wife's reactions to mistakes. Not openly, mentally. Like I was trying to predict what would happen if she ever found out. If she forgot something small, I'd watch how she responded. If I messed up around the house, I'd analyze whether she stayed angry or let it go. It became obsessive, because I wasn't trying to understand her temper. I was trying to calculate whether the truth would permanently change our marriage. That's the thing about hidden guilt. It turns you into a paranoid person, even during normal, happy moments. Especially during those moments. I remember one night, maybe 6 months after the trip, my son had a mild asthma flare-up at home. Nothing serious, but my wife asked me to grab the inhaler from the kitchen. And I swear to God, my heart started racing instantly. Not because he was in danger, because suddenly I was back there again, mentally. Same object, same responsibility, same fear. I checked the inhaler counter 4 times before bringing it back. 4! My wife even laughed and asked what was taking so long. I laughed too, but inside I felt sick. That became my normal life afterward. Constant double-checking, constant fear, constant replaying. And weirdly, I almost felt like I deserved it. Like my brain created its own punishment because nobody else knew what I'd done. The worst moments were always late at night. That's when memories get louder. That's when your brain starts building alternate timelines. I became obsessed with alternate timelines. The version where the clinic was closed. The version where the ferry got delayed. The version where his breathing got worse halfway across the water. The version where my wife grabbed the inhaler first and saw the zero immediately. That last one haunted me most, because I've imagined that conversation thousands of times. I know exactly how it would have looked. Her staring at the counter, looking at me, realizing instantly what happened. And then that horrible moment where trust changes shape permanently. That's the real reason I never told her. Not because I was scared she'd scream, not because I was scared she'd leave. I was scared of seeing disappointment replace safety in her eyes. People think guilt is mainly fear of punishment. It isn't. Real guilt is grieving the version of yourself someone else believed you were. And I think that's why this confession stayed buried for so long. Because once I say it out loud to her, I can never take it back. She'll never unknow it. Every future moment involving our son's asthma would become contaminated by that memory. Every inhaler, every trip, every medical emergency. She would always remember that once, when it mattered most, I failed. There's another detail I've never forgotten either. The doctor in the clinic definitely knew. I am absolutely certain of it now. At the time, I was too panicked to process his expression fully. But looking back, he knew. The second he saw the empty inhaler, he understood exactly what happened. And I think part of me has always wondered if he judged me. Maybe not openly, maybe professionally he moved past it immediately. But I still think about the look on his face sometimes, because parents are supposed to be the final safety layer. And for one horrible afternoon, I was the danger instead. That realization changes you permanently, especially as a father. You stop seeing yourself as automatically safe. You realize you're capable of catastrophic mistakes too. And honestly, that realization made me more anxious afterward in every area of parenting. Seatbelts, medication, food allergies, travel bags, emergency numbers. I became borderline obsessive about preparation. My wife even started joking that fatherhood turned me into a control freak. She only knew why. The irony is that she trusts me more now than she did back then. That's the part that hurts most. Over the years, we became a really solid team as parents. Reliable, organized, careful. She depends on me constantly now. And every time she does, there's still a tiny voice in my head saying, if she knew the truth, would she still trust you this much? My question never fully leaves. A few months ago, something happened that brought all of this back harder than usual. My son needed a refill prescription. He's older now, so the doctor started teaching him to check the inhaler counter himself. We were sitting in the kitchen while the doctor explained it, and then my son said something casually that almost stopped my heart. He said, "Dad always checks it like 10 times already." Everybody laughed, even me. But inside, I felt completely exposed for a second, because he didn't know he was describing guilt, not responsibility, not careful parenting, guilt. That's what all of this really became. One endless delayed reaction to a single mistake. Sometimes I genuinely wonder if confessing now would only be selfish, because who would it help? Not my son, not my wife. The only person who might feel relief is me. And after carrying this for years, I honestly don't know if I deserve relief anymore. Maybe this is just one of those things you live with forever. A private punishment. A permanent reminder. The scary thing is how ordinary the original mistake was. That's what I keep coming back to. It wasn't some monstrous decision. No drinking, no recklessness, no abuse, no evil intent. Just distraction. That's it. And somehow, distraction almost became tragedy.